My name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm 33 years old, and 2 weeks ago, I watched my younger brother take over the business my grandfather built, while my parents stood by like I never even existed. I stood outside the glass office doors, staring at the plaque they'd had made with his name on it. Not our name, just his. There had always been a quiet understanding in our family. Daniel would get the spotlight, and I would get what? A polite applause from the back row, a congratulatory card, and a front row seat to my own erasure? I pressed my hand against the cool glass, unsure whether I was trying to walk in or holding myself back from smashing it. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, like you were always the help but never the heir, then you'll understand exactly how much that moment broke me. Leave a comment if you've ever watched someone else get handed everything you worked for. And if you haven't yet, buckle up. Because before I explain how I walked away from them and built something they could never take credit for, I need to tell you what it's like growing up when ambition is treated like a flaw, unless it comes in the form of a son. I grew up in Rockwell, a mid-sized town in Pennsylvania that had delusions of being a city. My family's auto parts company had been around longer than I'd been alive, founded by my grandfather just after he returned from the Korean War. Whitaker and Sons Auto Supply. Not and daughters, mind you, that never even crossed their minds. My dad, Martin, inherited it in the late 80s, and under him, it grew into a regional supplier. We weren't rich in the flashy sense, no marble foyers or private jets, but we were comfortable. Enough that when people said our name around town, they said it with a kind of grudging respect. I hated that phrase, grudging respect. It felt like the whole town saw us the same way my father saw me. Capable, but not central. When I was 9, I could already list every type of filter in our warehouse and knew how to invoice a bulk order faster than my brother, who was then 7 and more interested in flinging oil caps like frisbees across the shop floor. I helped in the summers, unpaid, of course, while Daniel took karate lessons or tagged along to baseball camp. My dad would smile when customers praised my work ethic, but he always redirected the conversation to Daniel's natural leadership qualities. I didn't realize until much later that leadership was just code for "we've already decided he's the one." At family dinners, my mom, sweet but spineless, would smile and ask me about school, then immediately pivot to Daniel's latest science project or whatever sport he was half-heartedly failing at that month. "Isn't he just so clever?" she'd say, beaming, while I stared at my plate, fighting back the urge to ask why straight A's and perfect attendance weren't clever enough for her. I once won a regional business competition in high school for a mock logistics company I designed with just a laptop and 3 weeks of sleep deprivation. My prize was a firm handshake from Dad and a joke about how I'd make a fine secretary one day. Daniel got a standing ovation for not flunking geometry. College was the first time I tasted freedom. I got into Penn State on my own merit, no donations, no legacy pull, and majored in supply chain management. It was the first time I saw how powerful knowledge could be when it wasn't filtered through the narrow lens of family expectations. I aced my classes, got an internship with a logistics firm, and briefly entertained the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, I could take what I learned and bring it back home. Improve the family business. Grow it. Maybe even lead it. I should have known better. The summer after sophomore year, I came back full of ideas. I had spreadsheets, trend reports, even contacts at 2 distributors who were eager to work with us if we modernized our inventory system. My dad didn't even look at the packet I printed out. "That's real nice, Lauren," he said, not even pausing as he typed out an invoice. "But Daniel's gonna need your help in the shop this summer. He's still learning the ropes." Still learning the ropes. Like I wasn't already holding the whole damn ship together. That was the summer I stopped offering. I stopped bringing them ideas, stopped trying to be heard. I did what I was told, clocked in and out, and kept my head down. I think part of me hoped that if I proved myself in silence, they'd finally take notice. But silence was just another way for them to pretend I wasn't there. After college, I moved to Pittsburgh and took a job with a mid-sized freight company. I managed regional accounts, coordinated shipments across 3 states, and within 4 years, I was running a division. Meanwhile, Daniel stayed home. He worked at the shop part-time while figuring things out. I tried not to let it get under my skin. Maybe he needed time. Not everyone finds their path right away, I told myself. But when I came home for Thanksgiving and heard my dad talking about Daniel shadowing him at board meetings, the same ones I'd never once been invited to, something inside me cracked. The worst part? They weren't even being cruel. Not intentionally. That's what made it unbearable. They genuinely believed they were being fair. To them, I'd left. I'd chosen a different path. So, why would I expect to be included? That's how my father phrased it when I finally brought it up over coffee the next morning. "You have your life, Lauren," he said. Stirring his cup like this wasn't the most important conversation we'd ever had. "And Daniel's here, committed to the family legacy. You made your choice." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, got up, and walked out. I cried the whole way back to Pittsburgh, feeling like a stranger to the people who raised me. Years passed. I built my career in silence. I got a promotion, then another. Managed bigger teams, more complex operations. I learned how to negotiate, how to analyze risks, how to build something from the ground up. I rented a 1-bedroom near downtown, decorated it in warm tones and clean lines, and watched the skyline from my little balcony on Friday nights while my colleagues hit bars I had no interest in. I wasn't lonely, exactly, but I was restless, like I was waiting for someone to tell me I could begin. That permission never came. So one morning, the day after Daniel posted a blurry photo of himself on the shop floor with a caption dash, "Learning from the best. Dad's got me on payroll now, watch out." I woke up, made coffee, and decided I wasn't going to wait anymore. I pulled out a notepad and wrote one word at the top: start. Then I began sketching a plan for something I could call mine. My apartment didn't have much space, but for what it lacked in square footage, it made up for in quiet. That morning, as the city murmured just beyond my balcony door and the sun filtered through slatted blinds in soft bands of gold, I laid out sticky notes across my coffee table like a general preparing for war. I had no investors, no funding, no built-in infrastructure, but what I had, finally, was intent, and in a way that mattered more. I wasn't starting from a place of bitterness, at least not entirely. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was ownership of my work, of my name, of the hours I'd spent turning other people's problems into solutions while being treated like a ghost at my own family's table. I started small. Research first. I studied the gaps in regional distribution, the same ones I'd quietly flagged in my reports back at Whitaker and Sons, only to be ignored. I knew from years of experience where things broke down in the supply chain: poor last-mile routing, outdated inventory software, inefficient bulk storage protocols. Most mid-tier companies were either too bloated or too lean, either trying to scale too fast or not at all. I wasn't trying to be the biggest. I wanted to be the most precise. Reliable, streamlined, adaptable. I wasn't interested in replacing my family's business. I wanted to prove that I had always seen something they couldn't or wouldn't see in me. By the 3rd week, I had a basic business plan. By week 5, I'd chosen a name: Nova North Logistics. I didn't overthink it. I liked the sound of something new and clean and not tied to a surname that had done nothing but cage me in. I filed the LLC, opened a business account, and leased a corner office in a refurbished warehouse space on the edge of the Strip district. The space was cold and dusty at first, with exposed pipes and uneven flooring, but I loved it immediately. It felt honest, like something real could be built here, not handed down like some dusty heirloom no one asked for. I didn't tell my family. Not yet. I wasn't hiding it, exactly, but I wasn't about to invite them into something I was finally building without them. I wasn't going to ask for approval or pretend I needed their blessing. I hired 2 part-time contractors, both former colleagues, and we started taking small contracts for local routing. It was nothing fancy: food distributors, retail fulfillment, overflow warehousing. But we were fast. We were careful. We didn't promise more than we could do, and then we always did a little more than we promised. And within 6 months, Nova North was turning enough revenue to justify bringing on a full-time operations lead. I wasn't just afloat. I was steering something that was working. Of course, it didn't stay invisible forever. The first time my father found out, I wasn't even there. One of our suppliers had mentioned us in passing during a trade association luncheon. Said something like, "You know that new outfit, Nova North? They're snatching up all the fulfillment contracts south of I-80. I only heard about it because my mother left a voicemail at 10:17 p.m. On a Thursday. Her voice was low, almost embarrassed, like she didn't know whether she was proud or concerned. "Lauren, your father heard about your business today. I guess you never thought to tell us. Anyway, I don't know.
He's quiet about it.
He said he hopes you know what you're doing. Call me when you get a minute."
I didn't call back.
Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed staring into the dark, trying to feel something. Anything. But the truth is, I was too numb. For a moment, I'd wanted her to say something, anything, that sounded like, "I'm proud of you." But all I got was a secondhand shrug. Like I was a headline in someone else's news brief. Like even now, when I had proof of my work etched in black ink across balance sheets and invoices, I still wasn't real to them. The first time I ran into Daniel after that was at a friend's wedding. We weren't close, but mutual circles brought us both there. Her college roommate had married one of Daniel's fraternity brothers. I hadn't seen him in nearly a year. He looked the same, polished in that loose, careless way of someone who'd never had to claw for anything. He cornered me during the reception, champagne in hand, wearing a tie he hadn't bothered to tighten. "So," he said, flashing that grin he'd always used to get out of trouble as a kid. "Nova North, huh? Didn't peg you for a warehouse queen." I felt my jaw stiffen before I could answer. "Didn't peg you for someone who kept tabs on me." He laughed, too loud for the room. "Come on, Lauren.
Don't be like that."
I think it's cool. You're like, hustling. That's what you wanted, right?" I could have walked away. I should have. But something in his tone, that mixture of amusement and condescension, locked me in place. "I didn't want to hustle," I said evenly. "I wanted a seat at the table. When that didn't happen, I built a better one." He blinked at that just once, then took a long sip of champagne and leaned closer, voice low. "You know they're never going to see it that way. To them, you're still the one who walked away." I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, something clicked. It had never mattered what I did. As long as I wasn't Daniel, it was never going to be enough. After that wedding, I stopped checking their social media. Stopped answering the polite texts. Stopped feeling guilty for not showing up to birthdays or calling on Father's Day. I buried myself in the business. We expanded our service area into Ohio, then West Virginia. I hired a driver fleet, upgraded our routing software, and by the end of year 2, we'd signed a deal with a major medical supply distributor that changed everything. The contract was 7 figures. I remember standing in my office, phone in hand, rereading the email confirmation while my hands shook. It wasn't just a win, it was a declaration. I hadn't just survived without them. I'd built something that could swallow their operation whole, and not even blink. But instead of celebrating, I sat alone that night with takeout and a bottle of wine, staring at the city lights and wondering why it didn't feel like revenge. Maybe I'd wanted it to. Maybe I thought that proving them wrong would feel louder, more satisfying. But it didn't. It felt
Quiet.
not empty, exactly. Just finished. Like I'd turned a page and didn't need to read what came before anymore. Then, in the mail, came the letter that changed everything. A white envelope. No return address. My father's handwriting on the front, unmistakable and stern. Inside was a single sheet of company letterhead. The board and I have decided to formally name Daniel as successor to the company. We trust this is in the best interest of the business and family.
M.
Whitaker. No explanation. No mention of me. Not even a perfunctory acknowledgement. Just a formal announcement, like I was some distant cousin they'd forgotten to copy in on a holiday card. And that, more than anything else, shattered whatever flicker of hope I might have still had. They hadn't just passed me over. They'd written me out entirely. I didn't cry when I read the letter. I just sat there with it in my lap, the air around me buzzing like static, heart pounding too hard for something so brief. It felt less like an announcement and more like an erasure, like the last 20 years of effort had been condensed into a single sharp line of ink meant to fold me into silence. I reread it twice. Once out of disbelief, the second time because I needed to be sure there wasn't anything between the lines, some shred of recognition, some hint of hesitation. But there wasn't. Just my father's name scrawled with that same stiff pride he used to sign report cards and birthday checks. I had always wondered what the final betrayal would look like. I guess I'd pictured more drama, maybe even a fight. But no. It came quietly, like most things in our family. A clean cut, no noise, no mess. For 3 days, I didn't talk to anyone. My phone vibrated occasionally. Coworkers, a friend in Chicago, someone from the medical supplier asking about the logistics of an expanded fleet. I answered what I needed to, but my voice was hollow, clipped. I didn't tell them what had happened. I wasn't sure I could without cracking open something I didn't know how to contain. I didn't even tell Erin, my operations lead and closest friend, though I'm sure she sensed something had shifted. She gave me space, didn't pry, just picked up the slack where she could. It was the kind of quiet loyalty I never got from my own blood. By the weekend, I'd lost my appetite for silence. So I drove. I didn't have a plan, just keys in hand and a half-charged phone. I found myself back in Rockwell before I even realized that's where I was headed, the streets as unchanged as the people who lived on them. I parked outside the Whitaker and Sons headquarters, a low-slung brick building that had grown wider over the years, but never taller. That felt right. My family had always preferred expansion to elevation. Keep things wide enough to control, but never so high that someone might fall. The parking lot was nearly empty, it being a Sunday. But Daniel's car was there. The black SUV Dad had bought him when he graduated from a college he barely passed through. I should have turned around. I didn't owe them anything. But I needed to see it with my own eyes. Needed to feel what it was to stand in the shadows of a legacy I'd helped maintain but would never inherit. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as I stepped through the glass front doors. The air smelled the same, like dust, old paper, and oil from the garage bays. And then I saw him, in the main hallway, coming out of Dad's old office. He wore a pressed dress shirt with the company logo stitched neatly above the pocket. The very sight of it made my stomach lurch. He looked up and stopped mid-step. "Lauren?" I nodded, didn't speak. He glanced down at the envelope still in my hand. Recognition passed across his face like a cloud. You got it, huh? I didn't answer. The silence stretched. Daniel shifted his weight, shoved his hands in his pockets. Look, I didn't ask for this to be so cold. I thought Dad would at least call you first. Or talk to you. But you know how he is. Do I? My voice came out quieter than I expected, but sharper, too. Because apparently I don't know anything. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. It wasn't personal. It was only personal. We stood there like two strangers in a house we both used to live in. Everything between us had been paved over with the lie that this was just business, just logistics, just inheritance. But underneath it, there was a rot that neither of us wanted to name. He sighed, glancing down the hallway like he wanted an excuse to end the conversation. I mean, what did you expect? You left. You didn't want to be part of this. No, I said, my voice trembling with anger now. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to contribute without being treated like a temp. I wanted to be considered, even once, before every decision was made around me. You built your own thing, he said, shrugging. You've got Nova North. You're doing fine. And that's the part you don't understand, I snapped. I didn't build Nova North because I wanted to leave. I built it because you all left me first. Because I realized no matter how hard I worked, I was never going to be more than a footnote in someone else's story. Daniel looked away. I waited, hoping for some flicker of acknowledgement, but it never came. And that was the moment I realized he didn't need to steal the spotlight. It had been handed to him, and he never once questioned why. I left without saying goodbye. For days afterward, the conversation played in my head on loop. Not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. I had expected no apology, no reversal. What stuck with me was his certainty, his belief that everything made perfect sense. That what had been done was logical, justified, even kind in its own warped way. That I, with my separate business and separate life, had forfeited my right to be part of what was always mine, too. So I made a decision. If I couldn't reclaim the family business, I'd surpass it. Not with lawsuits or vengeance, not with public shaming or ultimatums. I would build something so undeniable, so structurally sound and ethically designed, that it would become the standard. And when people spoke of logistics in our region, they wouldn't say Whitaker and Sons. They'd say Nova North. They'd say my name. I called Aaron into my office the next morning and laid out the expansion plan. We would double our fleet by Q2. Offer late-stage manufacturing support for small industrial firms who couldn't afford to scale internally. We'd digitize our backend further, invest in proprietary software that could automate forecasting better than any off-the-shelf option. We'd create a mentorship initiative for women entering the supply chain workforce, something no other logistics company in the area was doing. I didn't say all the reasons out loud, but I think Erin knew. She nodded at the end of my pitch, eyes gleaming. You're going to burn the whole blueprint down, aren't you? No, I said, smiling for the first time in days. I'm going to write a better one. That afternoon, I called a venture capital contact I'd met 2 years earlier at a conference in Chicago. We hadn't spoken much since, but he remembered me, and he remembered the early data I'd once shared on our regional growth. By the end of the week, we were in active talks for a major investment round. Not all of it went smoothly. Some meetings fell apart. Some investors balked at my refusal to compromise on control or vision. But slowly the pieces began to move. I didn't hear from my family during any of it. Not even when Forbes Local did a feature on women-led businesses disrupting traditional industries in the Rust Belt. My face was on the cover. I saw Daniel's wife like the post on LinkedIn, and that was it. Silence from the rest. And yet, for the first time, that silence didn't sting. It clarified. They weren't watching anymore. Or maybe they were, quietly.
But I didn't need them to.
I had stopped building to be seen. Now I was building because I finally saw myself clearly. The invitation came in a thick white envelope, all embossed flourishes and formality. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the letterhead: Rockwell Regional Trade and Growth Foundation Annual Gala, honoring excellence in family enterprise. The honoree? Whitaker and Sons Auto Supply, accepted by Daniel Whitaker. I should have thrown it out. I didn't. I let it sit on my desk for 4 days, untouched but never ignored. A small rectangular reminder that even now, they had no problem parading what they'd taken. But what kept me from tearing it in two, was the footnote. Sponsored in part by Nova North Logistics. I stared at the line for minutes before it sank in. Erin had handled the local sponsorship approvals while I focused on scaling our West Virginia expansion. She didn't know the event was connected to my family. Why would she? To her, it was a checkmark, local visibility, a good cause, a nice PR moment. But to me, it felt like a trap. One I'd built myself, brick by brick, by growing big enough to end up back in their orbit. Still, I went. Not because I wanted to, but because some part of me needed to stand in that room and refuse to flinch. I'd spent years ducking away from their spotlight, letting them define the narrative while I did the real work in the dark. This time, I wanted to be seen, but on my own terms. The venue was a historic hotel downtown, all marble columns and velvet rope. Erin came with me, dressed in sleek navy with her usual sharp poise. I wore black, simple, tailored, deliberate. As we stepped into the ballroom, I felt a chill, not from the temperature, but from the weight of recognition. There, across the room, was my mother in a champagne dress, clinging to Dad's arm like the past 5 years hadn't split us apart. Daniel stood near the center, chatting with a banker I vaguely recognized. He wore a smile like a mask, the kind that photographs well, but never touches the eyes. I kept my head high. Erin touched my elbow lightly. "You okay? Ask me in an hour." The speeches began just before dessert. The host, a local councilwoman, stood at the podium and read from a script, all praises and platitudes about multi-generational excellence and the spirit of small-town innovation. I barely listened. My ears were ringing. Then I heard his name. "And now, please welcome our honoree, Daniel Whitaker, accepting on behalf of the Whitaker and Sons legacy." Applause. My body didn't move. I stared ahead as Daniel walked on stage, feigning modesty with a little wave and a sheepish smile. He stood behind the mic, cleared his throat, and began with a line so rehearsed it sounded like bad theater. "Thank you all. It's an honor to represent not just our company, but our family and the values we were raised with: resilience, loyalty, and integrity." Something inside me snapped. He kept going, talking about the legacy his grandfather started, how his father grew the business, how he was now carrying the torch. Not once did he mention anyone else.
Not me.
Not even a nod to the years I'd spent keeping the place afloat. I felt Erin shift beside me, sensing my tension. Then he said it. "And as we look to the future, we're exploring more partnerships, even with companies like Nova North Logistics, who share our commitment to excellence in distribution." My jaw clenched. It was the only time our name came up. A vague compliment twisted into a claim of association. Like I was some scrappy affiliate, not the founder of one of the fastest-growing independent logistics networks in the region. People applauded again, not knowing they were clapping for a theft in real time. Erin whispered, "Do you want to leave?"
No.
I stood up. The host had barely taken the stage back when I walked straight toward her. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just knew that if I left without speaking, I'd never forgive myself. She looked startled but leaned toward me when I reached the side steps of the platform. I said something brief, just enough to ask for the mic. She hesitated, then, perhaps sensing a moment, handed it over. The room quieted. I took a breath. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, I began. My voice shook, but I held it steady. But since Nova North Logistics is listed as a sponsor and was just named as a potential partner, I feel the need to offer some clarity. Daniel's face turned toward me sharply. I didn't look at him. My name is Lauren Whitaker. I'm the founder and CEO of Nova North Logistics. I grew up in this town. I worked in the back rooms and bay doors of Whitaker and Sons for years. I learned operations, inventory, and customer service before I had a driver's license. And when I left to build something of my own, I did it without a cent of family money because it was never offered. What I created, I built from the ground up, not as an extension of anyone else's name, but as a correction to what that name left out. A hush fell over the crowd. And I want to be clear, Nova North is not a subsidiary, not a partnership extension. We're a competitor, and we're proud of it. I let the mic hang in the silence. Then I stepped back. Aaron was already by my side as we walked out, heels clicking across polished tile like punctuation. Behind me, someone clapped. Then someone else. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it didn't need to be. Outside, the air was crisp. Aaron turned to me with wide eyes and a slow grin. Holy hell. I meant every word. She squeezed my hand. You just rewrote the whole story in front of them. I didn't cry until I got home. Not from regret, but from release. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink to fit their frame. I burned it down and stood among the ashes with something that was finally, irrevocably mine. The next morning, my inbox looked like a battlefield. Dozens of emails pinged in, flagged with terms like interesting turn of events, clarification requested, and from one PR contact I barely knew, damn, girl. Word had spread. The clip of my speech, shaky, low resolution, but unmistakably clear, had made its rounds on LinkedIn and was already climbing in views. Someone had caught the entire moment on their phone and uploaded it with a caption dash, when your brother tries to take credit for your empire and you decide to burn the house down politely. I didn't even know the woman who posted it. But overnight, she'd given me the kind of exposure most people paid consultants to chase. Not all responses were glowing. Some people, mostly older business owners who'd played golf with my father, thought I'd been dramatic or unprofessional. A few muttered about how it was in poor taste to call out family at a charitable gala. I let those emails sit unanswered. The people who mattered, the ones who were building, innovating, fighting to be heard in boardrooms that never made room for them, they understood exactly why I did what I did. And they didn't just understand. They started reaching out. 3 offers of strategic partnership came through within the first 72 hours. One was from a women-run transportation network expanding down the East Coast. Another came from a startup focused on AI-based inventory forecasting. And the third, the one that made me sit down and reread it 3 times, came from a national supplier who had once turned me down flat. Back then, they told me I was too local, too new, too untested. Now, they were asking if I'd consider absorbing part of their regional footprint. Aaron walked into my office holding a printed copy of the request like it was a birthday cake. You seeing this? I'm seeing it, I said, exhaling slowly. You okay? I hesitated. I think I am. I didn't think it would move this fast. She sat down across from me. You told the truth in public. That scares people. But it also wakes people up. You didn't just make a scene, you made a statement. She was right. But part of me still felt like I was standing on shaking ground. Not because I doubted my decisions, but because I knew how my family would react. And sure enough, 2 days later, the knock came. I was alone in the office. Most of the team had gone home for the evening, and I was combing through site maps for a potential third warehouse when I heard it. A firm, unhesitating knock. I didn't even need to open the door to know who it was. There was a rhythm to it I'd grown up with. 3 hard knocks.
No pause.
Like control wrapped in politeness. It was my father. He stood in the doorway in a long wool coat, hat in hand like some relic from another time. His expression was neutral, unreadable. I hadn't seen him in person in nearly a year. "Lauren," he said, voice clipped.
Dad.
"Can we talk?" I let him in. We sat in the small conference room with its mismatched chairs and scuffed table, a far cry from the polished oak and leather furniture in his boardroom. He glanced around the space with a faint twitch of disapproval. I didn't bother to explain. Let him see what I'd built without his advice. "I came because your speech," he began, clearing his throat. "It's caused quite a stir." I folded my hands and nodded once.
I'm aware.
He looked at me for a moment, eyes narrowed slightly. "You humiliated your brother." I told the truth. "You embarrassed the family in front of business partners, board members, people we've worked with for decades." "No," I said calmly. "You embarrassed yourself by pretending I never existed. I just corrected the record." He looked like he wanted to argue, but for once he didn't. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You always had a way with words." "Words were the only thing I had left," I said, "since ownership, acknowledgement, and respect were all already given away." Silence stretched between us. The hum of the old HVAC unit filled the room. Then, to my shock, he said, "You've built something impressive." I blinked. "Excuse me? I've seen the numbers. Your growth. Your contracts. I don't know how you did it without folding. I expected you to fold, to burn out, to come back eventually." I stared at him. "That's what you wanted?" "No," he said, slower this time. "It's what I predicted. But you proved me wrong." Something in my chest twisted. Not with pride, but with grief. All these years, I had chased an approval I thought was withheld out of principle. But now I saw it. He'd never believed I could win. And when I did, he didn't know what to do with it. "So now what?" I asked. He hesitated. "Daniel's struggling." I laughed. "Of course he is. He's in over his head. The board's nervous. They thought he'd be more aggressive,
Strategic.
like you. And now you want me to fix it?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. "No," I said. "Absolutely not. You could consult."
No.
I'm not a backup generator for a system that never made space for me." He stood, slowly, like the weight of my refusal finally registered. "You've changed." "No," I said, rising too. "You just never saw me clearly." He nodded once, jaw tight, and left without another word. When the door closed, I felt no triumph. Only confirmation. They still didn't get it. They never would. But I wasn't waiting for that anymore. That weekend, I met with the national supplier and signed a conditional agreement to absorb 3 of their fulfillment hubs across Pennsylvania. Overnight, Nova North tripled its capacity. I hired more staff. Promoted Aaron to COO. launched a regional hiring campaign aimed at underrepresented applicants, and began drafting a mentorship program that bore one rule in big, bold letters: no nepotism. The fallout with my family didn't go away. They stopped inviting me to things entirely. My mother sent a half-hearted text once: "You and your father are both stubborn," but I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer felt the need to explain myself. I'd spent too many years whispering my value into empty rooms. I was done whispering. A year passed. The city changed seasons 3 times while Nova North became something bigger than I ever thought possible. We signed with a national beverage brand, then picked up a regional medical distribution account so large it forced me to secure warehouse space in 2 new states. I stopped being introduced as a local upstart and started hearing my name in places I'd never walked: on calls from venture firms in New York, in conference panels hosted in Los Angeles, even from old classmates who suddenly remembered my number. I didn't chase the attention, but I didn't deflect it either. I had earned this space, and for once, I stood in it fully. The office looked different now. We'd expanded into the unit next door, knocking down walls and installing glass partitions that let light in and kept everything moving. I liked watching my team from the corner conference room: the way they collaborated, the rhythm they moved in, the care they brought to every detail. Some days I'd forget, even if just for a moment, how far I'd come. Then a new intern would introduce themselves nervously, and I'd see myself again. All that potential waiting for permission. I made sure they never had to ask. One morning, I found myself alone in the building before sunrise. The team had a half-day off, and I came in early out of habit. Old rhythms are hard to break, even when they no longer serve you. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching headlights blink along the overpass. It hit me, in a way it hadn't before, that I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for recognition. Not for family. Not for some imagined moment where the past would make sense. The legacy I wanted didn't live in old photos or family plaques. It lived here, in movement, in independence, in choosing growth over bitterness every single day. I hadn't spoken to Daniel since the gala. Not once. He had become a shadow in the corner of my mind, familiar but distant. I'd heard rumors that Whitaker and Sons was struggling, that several clients had left after my expansion, that a few board members had resigned. I didn't gloat. I didn't intervene. I let the tides rise where they would. We were competitors now. Nothing more, nothing less. But one afternoon in early March, my receptionist buzzed me with a strange edge in her voice. "There's a visitor asking to see you, says his name is Jacob Moore." My hand froze. I hadn't heard that name in years. Not since the summer I left for college, when Jacob had been the only person in our high school willing to say out loud that I deserved better than the back office they kept stuffing me into. We'd had a brief thing then. He'd gone into commercial law. I hadn't seen him since. I told her to send him in. He looked different, of course. Older but more confident. Like someone who'd had just enough failure to know how to wear success without apology. "Lauren," he said, smiling as he stepped into the office. "You probably don't remember me." "I do," I said, gesturing toward the seat across from mine. "I remember you told me I should build my own company when I was 17. Guess I finally listened." He laughed. "Guess you did. I'm here on behalf of a client. They're restructuring and looking for clean acquisition. Their logistics vendor fell through, and your name came up in all the right rooms." We spent the next hour talking numbers, strategy, vision. But underneath it, there was something else, that soft shimmer of recognition, of someone who'd seen you before you fully became yourself. When he left, he handed me a business card and said, just in case you want to finish that conversation from 10 years ago. I tucked it into my desk drawer and smiled for the rest of the day without realizing it. I didn't need validation from my family anymore, but that didn't mean I'd stopped wishing I'd had it. There's a difference. The wound dulls, but it doesn't vanish. It becomes part of your architecture, the foundation of the thing you choose to build anyway. Months later, I stood at the podium of a Women in Entrepreneurship Summit, scanning a packed auditorium of faces, and shared my story for the first time in public. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I talked about legacy and work and what it means to build in the shadows when the spotlight was never pointed your way. I spoke about systems, family ones, business ones, and how the moment you stop asking for a seat at the table and start designing your own blueprints, everything changes. When I stepped off the stage, someone in the audience followed me out. She was maybe 27. Nervous. Eyes wide. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "How did you know it was okay to stop waiting?" I paused, then answered, because I realized they were never going to open the door. And I stopped believing that meant I wasn't allowed to walk through one. She nodded. I could see her writing that answer into herself like a note for later. I wished I'd had someone tell me that when I was her age. Later that night, I stood alone in my apartment, glass of wine in hand, the city stretching out in lights below me. I thought of everything I'd left behind. Everything I'd made, every step where I almost turned back, and every breath since I finally stopped asking for permission. Has someone ever told you who you're supposed to be, and you believed them just long enough to forget what you already knew? Then you understand. This story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's been underestimated, sidelined, or shut out of rooms they helped build. And if you've ever rebuilt your life from the ashes of someone else's definition, hit that like button and tell me in the comments what you built instead. Thank you for listening to my story.